Hi everyone, we are due for a reading catch-up because it is the 20th of December and I haven't filmed my November wrap-up, which is possibly the latest I have ever left it. I think I just hadn't been hugely excited to get to it because I didn't have the best reading month in November, but I did still read some amazing books, but it was really up and down. So let's dive in and talk about them. I'll list all the books in the description box down below. I also filmed, was it just one? I think maybe just one reading vlog last month. Yes, it was one reading vlog last month, which I'll also link in the description box down below, where I talked about 5 of these books in more detail. So it's not surprising, I think, that I had a not great start to the reading month in November because I decided to do a reading vlog where I read the oldest books on my TBR. And some books obviously stay on our TBR for ages just because, well, sometimes I save books for a rainy day that I think are going to be amazing. And I don't really understand why I do that, but I do that. But the ones that have been sitting there for a really long time, apart from the one that I ended up really loving, were books I had picked up before, tried the beginning of and thought, not right now, and then put it back. So I don't think I should be shocked that I ended up not loving the books that I had already tried once before and not enjoyed then, because, you know, our reading tastes do change over time and a lot of it is about the time and place that we pick up a book, but I'm also still essentially the same person. So there we go. So the books that I decided to part ways with after trying them in that reading vlog were The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is the only book of his that I hadn't read, so I've now read all of them, and I have had a hit and miss relationship with his books in the past. Some, like Never Let Me Go, I have adored. Others, like The Unconsoled, not that keen on. This one, just I found really quite boring, which I feel really apologetic about saying, but it's how I felt. There are elements of this book that remind me a little bit of The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which is actually a book that I did enjoy, in that both of the novels are about memory loss and existing in a society where people mysteriously forget things. The word choice gives me a Tolkien vibe, but the world building is not that strong, and that may be a knock-on effect from the subject matter. Because it's about people who are forgetting things all the time, they repeat things a lot, and also they forget what's beyond their immediate surroundings, and then they'll suddenly remember again. And that could be intriguing, but unfortunately for me, it just ended up in me not feeling as though I could believe in either the people or the place, because nothing felt substantial or concrete. So this one, unfortunately, was not for me, so I decided to put it down after reading about a third of it. A book that I did enjoy in the reading vlog itself was The Drum Tower by Farnoosh Moshiri. And I think I said at the beginning of that reading vlog that I thought this book was going to be fantasy. For some reason, I'd got it in my head that this was fantasy, and it's not. It's not fantasy at all, but it is about a family who really deeply believe in a mythological creature, and that has become very important to the folklore of their family tree. And it's something that the children, the daughters in particular, or granddaughters actually, cling to. It's kind of interpreting traumatic events via storytelling as a means to distance yourself from things. I'm being very vague about this. Okay, so this is about 2 young girls, and one of them decides that she is going to run away. She's trying to find out what happened to her mother, who is hated by her grandmother, and it's really actually about the Iranian Revolution. As I mentioned in the vlog, this book does feel tapestry-like in the way that it goes back and fills in backstories for each of the characters, and sometimes in books I can find that a little bit tiresome because it feels like stalling for time because they haven't worked out what's going to come next in the plot yet. And I didn't particularly feel that with this book. I liked that it was really laying the groundwork for what was to come. It was just, unfortunately, as the book progressed, I didn't end up enjoying it as much as I had hoped to. I found that it dragged quite a bit, and it's one of those books where I just think it was okay, like it was fine, but I didn't love it and I didn't really dislike it. It was all right, and that's not really how you want to feel about any book. You don't want to be apathetic. That's frustrating, but I suppose better than disliking something. But I don't have loads to say about this, just that it wasn't a favourite, which I had hoped it might be when I started reading it, but there we go. And let's whiz through these two DNFs. This was Fairytales for Wild Girls by Allyse. The language in this book I found really over the top and detracted from what was actually going on. I felt the plot was really messy. I talked about it in the vlog, and you can go and check that out if you would like to. But essentially, this book just it was chaotic and not in a way that I was enjoying. So I decided to say farewell to that one. And then this one was one that I thought I was going to part ways with. I couldn't even remember why I had purchased it. It's been about 7 years. I think maybe I thought it was something different to what it actually is. But this is The Tongues of Men or Angels by Jonathan Trigell. Jonathan. And this is a book about life for disciples after Jesus died, and that's just, I wouldn't buy that book now, and as I said, I don't know why I bought it then. It's a mystery we'll probably never solve, but I'm sure somebody else will enjoy it. I will make sure that it goes to a good home. But the book that I did love from that reading vlog, thank goodness, there was one, and it was the one if I had ranked them before I started reading them, it's the one I would have guessed I would have enjoyed the most, and that is the Hopkins manuscript by R.C. Sheriff. I think this is going to be in my top books of the year. It was just a really fascinating book to read. It was written in the 1930s, and it's about a world where the moon collides with the earth, and it's written from the point of view of this man who lives in the countryside, who is full of self-importance and breeds hens and is part of the Lunar Society, and he can't understand why no one cares about what he has to say, because people don't, because why would they? But his, ironically, is the manuscript that is what people in the future find when they're researching the UK and indeed the entirety of Europe and what life was like before the moon collided with the earth, because they have no idea. In fact, the only thing that they could salvage from the UK was a sign that says, please keep off the grass, and that's in a museum somewhere. And as I mentioned in the vlog, I do find it rather hilarious that a passive aggressive sign is all that was left of our society. You know, maybe we deserve that. I think this novel works so well because of the balance when it comes to tone. Often we are laughing at the narrator, Hopkins, because he is so full of self-importance and he doesn't realise how ridiculous he is. But then also some of his observations about the way the world is looking as the moon gets closer to the earth are really profound and wonderful. It's a pleasant surprise when the novel evolves into something else. It's not even something that the narrator intends. Obviously the author intends it, which I think is why it's so good. R.C. Sheriff is presenting a really annoying narrator who is not aware of the importance of what he's actually chronicling. He thinks it's important because of himself, but that's not the case. It's important because of the way everyone is reacting in society and him recording that for history. So we accidentally end up getting a novel that is about climate change and colonialism, and it critiques both of those things. As I said, this is a novel written in the 1930s, specifically in 1939, and is it therefore a surprise that this book deals with terror and impending doom and white supremacy because it was the beginning of the Second World War? Who is the moon? What metaphor is that? There's so much to discuss here, and how it interacts both with the history of its time but also with our modern day as well. So I would really, really recommend it. Sorry, my camera battery died, so we're back, possibly with slightly different lighting, I don't know, and a cup of tea. Cheers. The next book that I read was a middle grade novel, and this is The Haunting of Aveline Jones by Phil Hicks. It's the first in a new series. It's a ghost story. It's about a young girl called Aveline who goes to stay with her aunt in a town by the sea, and she really loves reading ghost stories. She finds an old bookshop in the town, makes a friend there, finds a book that used to be owned by someone in the town who died. So that's the premise, and I liked this book. I did. I didn't love it, but I think there's lots to recommend about it. Sometimes I read middle grade books and I think this works for any age group. I would recommend it to everyone. And sometimes I think I really would recommend it to middle grade, which is not a criticism at all, because that's who this book is for, and that's absolutely fine. But I think this is one of those ones that I would say I would really press into the hands of younger readers, because I think maybe for the scary element as it's written, I think it would work best for a younger audience. But as I said, I enjoyed it. It's just not one of my favourites, and I don't know if I'll continue on with the series, but it is creepy. And then, speaking of creepy, I read Sarah Waters' Fingersmith. I actually listened to this one on audio, and I feel like I have to tell you who the narrator is, because the audiobook, as with all Sarah Waters books, was delightful. It's narrated by Juanita McMahon. I actually watched the film The Handmaiden, which is a Korean film, which is based on Fingersmith, and I didn't know that when I watched it, because I wouldn't have watched it if I'd known that, because I really wanted to read Fingersmith. But it had been maybe 2 years, at least, maybe 3. No, it must be 3, because I always forget. The past 2 years, I forget that they count. So it's probably been, I don't know, whenever that film came out, I watched it. Let's depress ourselves by finding out when that film was released. 2016, but I didn't see it at the cinema. So let's say 2017, that's still nearly 5 years ago. Okay, right, it's been a while. So yeah, I watched that film, and then I thought, okay, so I don't want to read Fingersmith until I've forgotten a lot of what I've seen. I know they changed quite a bit for that film, but still, the main twists are still there. So I had forgotten some of them. I did remember them as I was listening to them, but it's more about, oh God, to sound like cliche, it's more about the reading experience with Sarah Waters. It's not the exactly what's happening, but how she's telling it. There you go. Put that on a t-shirt. Many of Sarah Waters' books open with a reference to a book or a show or a performance, often a Dickens reference, in a similar vein to Allyse Smith, who often does this too. And I think of Sarah Waters as like a Victorian Allyse Smith. In fact, their work has really interesting conversations with each other. I find that rather fascinating. But Fingersmith opens with a play of Oliver Twist, and it's set in 1862, and the main character, Susan Trinder, is in the audience of this show as if she was a Dickensian character herself, specifically an Oliver Twist character, because she's there to pickpocket or to fingersmith. And fingersmith was also a word that was used to talk about midwifery, and Sarah Waters is playing around with imagery of gloves and hands and women, because this is a queer love story. Sue is being exploited by other thieves. She lives in a house of petty thieves, and she has higher expectations in life. She wants a heist. She wants something that is worth her time, not all of this small time game. And then one day she gets a visit from a man who they call Gentleman, and Gentleman is someone who she believes to be gay, who says that he would like to pull off this really big feat. He wants to marry this rich woman and then make everyone believe that she's insane, put her in an asylum, and then have all of her money. So he asks Sue if she will come with him and be her handmaid and help him convince everyone that she is mad, and then he will give her some money from the winnings that he then gets. So that is the premise of the book. There are lots of twists and turns in this book, so I don't want to talk about the plot as it goes on. I will just say it's really atmospheric. I really loved it. It has actually influenced my reading for December, which I'll talk about in another reading vlog, because I was listening to Sarah Waters talk about inspiration for Fingersmith after I finished reading it. She's just such a brilliant storyteller, and I have listened to all of her books on audio because they are very long and the font is very small, which is not easy for me to read. But I recommend the audio on top of that because the narration is so brilliant. Like, all of the books have been a delight to listen to. And I have said this before, but let me say it again. If you are someone like me who doesn't get on with Charles Dickens but would really like to, look, I have tried. I have even listened to David Copperfield narrated by Richard Armitage, and if that can't convince me to like Charles Dickens, I don't know what will. There are elements of his storytelling that I really like. I like how many characters he's got. I really like the way that it's paced and how you go on this epic journey. But Sarah Waters, I feel, has all of that atmospheric element. She has all of those characters because she loves Dickens so much as well. She's cherry-picked all the best bits, inserted queer things, and it's just a much more enjoyable experience for me personally. So if you love Dickens, I recommend. If you don't love Dickens but would like to, I also recommend. It is probably my I don't know if it is my favourite. This is most people's favourite Sarah Waters. I only have Infinity left to read. I'm not sure which one is top for me, but if I hadn't watched The Handmaiden, this may have been my favourite, but I already knew some of the massive twists in here, which I think would have shocked me if I had come to this first. So I think that's warping my view somewhat. And then after I read Fingersmith, I then read Islands of Mercy by Rose Tremain. This is also really good on audiobook, but unfortunately, because I was reading this after just reading Fingersmith, and this is set in 1865, so the same decade, and it is about queer relationships, it pales in comparison with Fingersmith, which is unfortunate for this book. Maybe if I had read it another time when I hadn't just read a novel that did what it was trying to do so much better, then I would have enjoyed it, but I didn't. I think also it's trying to achieve too much. It's set in Bath and then also in London and then in France and then in Borneo, and I didn't really believe, especially in the Borneo part, that the author knew a lot about the places that she was writing about, and that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. However, if you have read all of Sarah Waters' books and you are looking for other Victorian books with queer relationships in them, then please, may I recommend this. And then the final book that I read in November was Strangers on a Train by Patricia Highsmith. And again, this is one that I thought was all right. I didn't love. I'm bored of saying this now about books that I read in November, but unfortunately that's how I felt about a lot of them. The premise of this book is fantastic. The execution, not so much. So this is about two men called Bruno and Guy, and they meet on a train. They are strangers on a train, and Bruno is quite drunk. He is irritated. He wants to make friends with someone, and he kind of forces himself onto Guy and is like, come have dinner with me. And as I was reading this book, I mean, just in my head, Bruno is Boris Johnson. That's all that I could imagine when I was reading this book, which is not a pleasant image to have in your head when you're reading a book. So they start having a conversation, and it turns out that Bruno and Guy both have someone in their life that they would like to be rid of. And for Bruno, that's his father, and for Guy, that's his ex-wife. And Bruno says, wouldn't it be great if we decide that we're going to kill the other person's enemy, because nothing would come back to us, because no one knows that we've met and that we know each other, we'd never speak to each other again. Wouldn't that be an amazing idea? And Guy's like, ha, yeah, lol, that sounds great. And he doesn't think that Bruno's being serious until his ex-wife then ends up dead. And Bruno's like, well, when are you gonna go and kill my father? Sounds amazing, right? And that plot happens right at the beginning, and I won't talk about plot in the rest of the book because of spoilers, but the rest of the book relies so much on the tension from the beginning that it doesn't capitalize on it. It doesn't fulfill its potential. I feel like a disappointed teacher saying, you coasted. Why did you do that? This book could have been wonderful, and I just felt like it kind of was a firework that spluttered and died. So that's a shame. And what a note to end on. What a great note to end on. I would love to know if you have read any of these books. I would love to know what you read in November. Please let me know in a comment down below. If you're new to this channel and would like to subscribe, I would enjoy that. Please do that. I talk about books on this channel, as you may have noticed, as well as the history of fairy tales, representation of disfigurement and disability, and quite a bit of baking as well. I hope you're all doing okay, and I will speak to you very soon. Sending love.